So here's an impromptu, an unwritten, but I have been thinking about it on my long walk. It's a kind of thinking that I have a tendency to do, and I don't encounter it very often. So, but that doesn't mean it's any good or anything special. It's just a thing about perspective. It's the way my mind tends to go, and I don't know whether that has to do with my training as a performer, where you tend to sort of focus on inner workings and motivations. Anyway, on the subject of Palestine, I'm mystified by the block that people seem to have about people who support the Israeli response to October the 7th. Especially Americans who find it, who go, why does so and so do that? And I remember, and then they say things like, well, AIPAC, and AIPAC is paying them, is contributing to their elections and all that sort of stuff. And I understand that that's a narrative that we apply to politicians. We think they're all being bribed, or they're weak, or they're crowd pleasers, or whatever it is. So they're just trying to do things to make their donors happy. And I understand how expensive this game is, and that's worth a conversation at another time, what might happen, especially now with social media. But I was struck by something that Emma Gonzalez, I remember, I was just reading about it, that they did a town hall meeting, CNN did a town hall meeting about gun issues, all the way back then, near Parkland time, 2018. And she was there, David Hogg, and a couple of other of the young survivors, and Marco Rubio, and one or two other people who I don't really recognize. But one of the kids said to Marco Rubio, how can you take money from the NRA? And Rubio said something really, really interesting. He said, that should have been heard. He said, I don't take money from them because I agree with them. I take money from them. I have a relationship with them because they agree with me. So I think all of this mystical thinking about whether Kamala Harris, who seems to be a nice person, and Joe Biden, who seems to be a nice person, I don't know that either is true, but I've not met them. There's not been any serious look at these two people. The idea that somehow they, because of political reasons, that they support Israel or whatever it is, and I don't think there's anything wrong with supporting Israel, unless you think another way. And so I guess people who don't support Israel presume that a reasonable person like Kamala Harris must be disturbed by this carnage. Well, she is an American. And we really should remember that the American myth that I was taught in various different schools, because we moved around a bit, but also that I think I picked it up much more from television, movies and stuff like that, that there is this notion that America was settled by Europeans who were oppressed, who were being starved, who were being, there was an equivalency with the people at the beginning of the State of Israel who just survived the Holocaust. The most horrific thing in one of the most horrific things, certainly in human history. So that what happened was we Americans invented themselves as European victims, people who wanted to leave Europe and become free. And free means free of oppression, free of being abused, free of being worked to death by the ruling classes in Europe. And that's what was going on. The treatment of the class of people, the Irish escaping the potato famine and stuff like that, it's all written down there. Yes, they did. So what happens is they arrive to this country, and they, typical Europeans, they say, this is ours. Right? This is ours. This is our country. We have discovered it. We've stuck a flag in it. This is ours. And we come here later on. They did this lovely revising. They actually came looking for a quicker route to the Indies so that they could trade, more easily stuff by sea and make money. All right. And when they found out that it wasn't the Indies, they decided, well, let's go and look for gold, etc. But whatever it was, they colonized this landmass, North and South America, and they did it very badly, right? So even if we assume that the one should have tremendous empathy for these Europeans, for the first time really in history, there was that kind of migration. And this mythology attached to it, some of it was grounded in truth. I would have kicked the Puritans out myself if I was Holland. But they were leaving horrible conditions in Europe without question. They were, that was the truth. It's not so much, I guess, it's not so much that you colonize. And we'll never know because it's never been done any other way. There's only one Earth. Until we start colonizing outer space, there's only been one great colonization, one great movement of colonization, Europe into the Western and Southern Hemisphere. And it was done badly, every damn time. Imagine and one imagines, we create all kinds of notions about the late 18th century in America and stuff like that. And there has been a tremendous amount of work, extraordinary number of historians, even still, who paint this picture of a sort of messianic, really new Bible idea. You've got patriarchs. You've got this sort of fantastical notion of creating freedom and all that sort of stuff. All of which, what can I tell you? I do think myself that freedom has a lot to do with staying put and, rebelling against your oppressors where you live. But they didn't do that. Or they had done it and it had been brutally, brutally repressed. Peasants' Rebellion, Civil War in England, stuff like that. Really horrible lot. But that's the myth, right? So Kamala, Joe, whatever it is, it may actually be in their DNA that this relationship to Israel is the Israelis, who, in terms of history, have a point about a homeland, a non-European homeland. The problem is how it was done, and it was done by, we know who it was done by the British, master colonizers. And they said, why shouldn't we do this just the way we treated the native peoples of the Americas? You just land and you say, move. You move on. There's the famous 1763 to 66 Pontiac Wars, rebellion. And after which the king, because they'd had enough, the native peoples in the Ohio River Valley, west of the Appalachians, had enough of this colonization, and they started to commit, if you like, acts of terror. And the King of England, George, said, we need to start moving west. Well, guess who got really ticked off about that? Mr. Thomas Jefferson. Now, I'm not a Thomas Jefferson fan. Anybody who's been listening to my stuff for any period of time knows that I'm not. And that's another story, endless. But particularly for this, he got so angry, and it was contained in his original Declaration of Independence, these savages, that the king had encouraged these savages to come against us, and all that blah, blah, blah. But it is, if you like, it is the original sin of the colonial movement, is that you go wherever you go to India, go to Australasia, go to New Zealand, go wherever you go to Canada, go to Latin America, South America, go to South America and say, we're here, we were inevitably going to be here, we are the superior people, move. If you don't move, you'll die. And if you and as you move, if you're not going to move, you need to convert and to believe what we believe. And that's the tradition out of which this comes. And America has a lot invested in that myth. And so there's this kind of strange thing, and I don't have any time for it. I am a European, I'm an Englishman, and I am aware of that point. 1492 is a good date. You could start with the Crusades in 1055 or whatever it was, that ghastly Pope. But again, imagine, one said, and what often happened in the Americas is that these conquistadors, or Puritans, or whatever they were welcomed. They were welcomed. And one imagines a scenario. It's never happened, so I don't think it's ever happened, unless Brando's Mutiny on the Bounty is some. You land in a place, you come from the European world with its Christian culture, which was a supremacist culture, and you come and you arrive in a place, and people are wearing much less clothes than you do, and they eat different food, and they have a completely different way of living, different way of fighting. They don't have the same weapons, and you might have said, one might have said, let's have a discussion. Is it possible? We are coming from over there, and we have many unhappy people. Can we, and they might say no. Yeah, but we should take no for an answer sometimes. But I don't believe, from what I've tried to find out, and it's very hard to find out how all of that was done, Balfour Declaration and annexation and the mandate and stuff like that. But on the on the evidence, British behavior with their colonies was mightily nuanced by this presumption of messianic superiority. So that's all. It's terrible what's happened and what's happening. But I guess that's the way I would think about it. If something, because what monotheisms do at the basis of our culture will do, and it was done all the time in the Americas, is it turns to people who resist, right, and calls them evil. That's what they do. So Crazy Horse, evil. Pontiac, evil. Sitting Bull, evil. It happened all over the Americas. The Comanche, evil. That's how our culture, our civilization responds. And personally, I think that's a huge, huge flaw and inexcusable. And if there is a project in hand going forwards, if that same civilization hasn't wiped us out with climate change, which it probably has, but if that's my civilization could just go, why don't we stop and think? instead of doing what we're doing, which is basically forging ahead and revising history to suit our extraordinary narcissism. You know, and the things that the versions of civilization that were here on this continent that one might have, what's the word they use all the time? Oh, assimilation, right? Assimilation is always one way. Assimilation is not a mutual experience. It's not a reciprocal experience. It's a one way. So when white people show up, and it's not really a racial thing, it's a civilization, a cultural thing, as Denzel would say. It's culture. The European shows up and says, no, you assimilate to us. So if you become Christian, you start wearing pants, you're groovy, you're cool with us. Not true. Not true, because we can still tell who you are by the color of your skin, and we're really bad at that. And I don't know how old this is. I don't know how long, I don't really know how long this has been going on. We have intimations from the pre-monotheist world, anyway, that people dealt with the other quite differently. There's a lot of assumptions that we make as our civilization. We write all the books, the ones in English anyway, because it's English civilization. We write all the books and we have all the philosophies and stuff like that. And I've read some of those books, and I've heard people talk about who've read more of those books talk about, and it's bullshit. For that reason, everything is created in terms of the premise that we are civilization. You know, it's my joke that if James Watt had invented his wee steam engine and had presented it to Atahualpa or Red Cloud might have said, well done, Jimmy. Now, how are you going to find a fuel to run that little steam engine that will not destroy the planet in 200 years? And it's entirely possible that might have happened. Now, you tell me, you can swear that this way of life that we have, this industrialized way of life, is everything, and everything other than this, everything around that surrounds this historically is meaningless. Well, you know, be careful with that. Yeah. And I think that the really unpleasant thing that I find about this, now that the European people say to me, men particularly will say to me, everything you have is because of the Western world or the Western whatever it is. And I go, no, it isn't. I'm sorry. You, apart from you being an asshole, you have no evidence of that. You don't know me. You don't know what's important to me. I know what's important to you. I can tell, because that's why you make that statement. The values of the West, which are genocidal. Genocide is an American value. Look at how it started. And it's certainly a value that we look at, which is what we're doing. We're looking at it and we're going, no, it's not that bad. You know, it's conditional. Well, no, it's not. And you know, that disregarding it, I think, is very, very corrupting. Indeed. And like I say, we probably won't survive long enough to reap what we've sowed. But I think for my civilization, there's a time for some real second thoughts and reappraisal and self-criticism. And all the way from the top, all the way from the beginning, because you know the colonialism was practiced before the colonies. You know, the ruling class of Europe decided that that it was that they were spiritually, genetically superior, and that they could treat their own people before they ever encountered an Oglala or an African. That's a culture, that's a civilization, and don't tell me they're all like that, because they're not. You're cherry picking. And they're not like that all the ones who might be like that somehow are not all like that all the time. Yes, there's a caste system in England, absolutely. The Chinese are hardly egalitarian or historically, absolutely. But those civilizations that we totally ignore, when the lovely Tom, oh God, what's his name? Spider-Man name. Anyway, Tom Holland says, that civilization has dominated the world Christianity has dominated the world for 2,000 years. And I'm going, yeah, except for half of it, 3 continents who didn't encounter it until 1493, if then. It's that kind of hubris. And the notion that being kind to strangers was a Jesus thing. It wasn't. Thousands of years of hospitality, the tradition of hospitality, all over the world. And the demonization by the monotheisms of what came before them, and then of each other. We have evidence of that right up until yesterday. And the extraordinary thing is that the white Europeans being horribly oppressed by the ruling classes of Europe, what does he do? He comes over to America and attacks the wrong people, the Iraqis. And then the Jews attack the Muslims, and the Muslim anti-Semitism is minuscule compared to Christian anti-Semitism. History of body count. So yeah, don't assume, if you're of your liberal persuasion, that it's a Republican America that is now perverting democratic America by sourcing their wine and making campaign contributions. Look at yourself. Yeah. Examine the self, the unexamined self.